if everyone's healthy, everyone's back, it's a top 5 offensive line.
XM, and now we got John McMullen. So let's bring John into the conversation now, and we'll talk some Eagles to get this Wednesday football fix segment underway. John, how you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, a little hockey shift. I like it.
Yeah, it's craziness. He's off the air at 7, and I'm basically, sliding across this table in here, like and popping the mic on, rocking and rolling.
Yeah, it gets tight in that studio. I do know that.
It does. But we're all good now. So, all right, we've been detailing, specific areas on the Philadelphia Eagles: wide receiver, tight end, running back. There's a tweet I want to get to with you here tonight, but we're going to hold off on that for a second. I want to focus on the offensive line. We've talked plenty about it, but we'll key in on it here tonight and just give us the update, lay the groundwork here for this conversation regarding the Eagles O-line.
A lot of options is the best way I would describe it. The offensive line, obviously coming off a bad season for what it has been. And I think if we talk about the regression of Carson Wentz on the field, that was probably the biggest reason for it, the lack of an offensive line. Typically, this was a top 10 offensive line throughout his first, through 2016 through 2019. So for 4 seasons, it was one of the best offensive lines in football. And then the injuries cropped up and maybe some age as well. And all of a sudden, it's probably a bottom 10. But while I say that, late in the season, all of a sudden you start seeing guys like Jordan Mailata, Nate Herbig developing, becoming competent players. And then you have a lot of the injured players returning, and they're good players. Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, and even from a talent perspective, Andre Dillard, obviously he hasn't proven it. So a lot of potential chess pieces for a new coach, Nick Sirianni, and obviously Jeff Stoutland, one of the few leftovers from the Doug Peterson regime, but he'll be back as the offensive line coach. A lot of ways to go, and it all starts with Jason Kelsey in the middle. Is he going to play? Does he want to play here? And that's one of the questions that are going to be answered.
Let's work in this tweet I mentioned right now. I'm bringing it up a little bit earlier than I was going to because I think it definitely applies to what we're talking about. Diana Rossini from ESPN tweeted earlier today, just texted with an NFL head coach about the upcoming cuts and what he expects, and I quote, "It's going to be a massacre next week all around the league." So fill us in on that and how it could impact the Eagles.
Well, yeah, it is going to be a little bit more. I think that's a little bit overplayed. I think, obviously, because, and I talked about it a lot with the budgeting and pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, so nobody thought the salary cap would be going down, so nobody was fully prepared for what's going on. But I do think that's a little hyperbole. Basically, you're probably talking for the average NFL team, maybe 1 or 2 decisions you have to make that you didn't think you were going to have to make. So I don't think it's quite as – there are a few teams, the Eagles are one of them, unfortunately. New Orleans probably even more so. A few teams really, really difficult situations, really up against it. And they might be making 3 or 4 decisions that they necessarily didn't have to make. But you already see the Eagles and what they've done. Deshaun Jackson, they've set up Alshon Jeffrey, Malik Jackson as their post-June 1st cuts. And once they get all that done, once they either release or trade Zach Ertz, you're probably talking about 1 or 2 more difficult decisions, and that's it. So I think if people expect, 50 guys to go, it's not going to be that bad.
All right, interesting. And just, getting back to the offensive line, the Eagles used 14 different offensive line combinations in 16 games. We all know what they went through this year. Offensive line in particular, it was a mess. So what's one area that we can definitely see some change coming? And I know you just kind of outlined it to start the conversation. It's hard to really predict. Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson. You have a core here that, if healthy and if they all decide to return, you're saying, okay, this is still a pretty damn good group. But what's one area on this line that you say, okay, well, we can upgrade here, and how?
Well, left tackle is still the area where you would say, you could have some excitement over Jordan Mailata. You can think Andre Dillard's going to be back. He's certainly going to be back healthy at 100%. Question is, will the Eagles keep him, trade him? What's going to happen there? So you have options, and in theory, if you're bringing back both, you do an old school competition, and whoever wins the position, and hopefully you play at a high level. But I will say that that's largely unproven. Mailata was uneven. I think everyone is a little bit too excited about his ceiling as a player because there's still some consistency issues, and understandably so. I mean, we all know the story, what he came from. But if you want to compare it to the heights of Jason Peters, again, not the last few seasons, and certainly last season when he struggled mightily. I'm talking about the Pro Bowl and even the All-Pro Jason Peters. That position is nowhere close to that right now. But that's kind of nitpicking. I mean, if you have the other four positions, if Lane is back and healthy, if Brandon's back and healthy, if Jason decides to play and is healthy, and Isaac Seumalo is your left guard, that's pretty darn good. And that would be really quickly, again, the strength of this team, to be honest, no matter who wins that left tackle position.
Kelsey has been a name we bring up a lot, whether he may decide to just step away from the game. He's mentioned it in the past. He may decide to go play with his brother in Kansas City. We don't know, but let's assume he doesn't return for whatever reason. What are the Eagles going to do to try and fill that void?
Well, they have options, and that's the good part of it. I mean, for years, this team has said probably the best position for Isaac Seumalo is center. And there was talk very similar to when Lane Johnson first got here. If you remember, they drafted him as a right tackle. Ultimately, they thought he would flip over to left tackle when Jason Peters retired. And then Jason kept playing and playing well and playing and playing well. And it got to a point where they were like, okay, Lane's the best right tackle in football. We're not going to move him. And I'm not saying Isaac is that type of player, but early in his career, that was the plan, that he would be the center once Jason Kelsey was gone. And Jason has continued to play at such a high level, and Isaac has kind of solidified that left guard position. So they might go in a different direction, but that's an option. Nate Herbig has a history of playing center. That's an option. Luke Juriga's here, who was a natural center. That's an option. So they have a lot of bodies. We talk about this team's deficiencies from a depth standpoint all over the roster. Not really at offensive line. They have a lot of players because of the guys coming back from injury, and they also have a lot of young players that were forced into action and played pretty well and have become legitimate prospects, guys like Herbig and Mailata and also Jack Driscoll. A lot of bodies, a lot of options, not as big as a concern as most other positions.
They do have a lot of options, and they can get creative. Let me just start with this. There's some names being thrown around as it relates to the 6th overall pick. Sewell from Oregon, offensive tackle. He's like blue chip, the real deal. We have Slater from Northwestern, who's he can play all 5 positions, I think, on the offensive line. So you have some guys that could come in right away and be a huge impact with the offensive line. Do you see that being any possibility at all?
Yeah, I do see it as a possibility because that's what this team believes in. They believe in building up front on both sides of the football. And really, the defensive line, there's not any worthy prospects at number 6. It's not a great season for the defensive line in the draft. I don't think you're going to see any top 10 picks from the defensive line. So if you just go from the Eagles and what they believe in their history, it's quarterback and offensive line before anything else. And there are prospects, Sewell being most notable, that are worthy of that selection. Ultimately, I don't think he's going to get to 6, so it's not going to be a concern. I don't think they pick Slater there, but hey, you never know. This team loves offensive linemen. They believe in getting offensive linemen, but I do think they have enough coming back that they don't have to force the issue and are probably going to look in a different direction, I would say.
Would it make sense to trade someone they have now, whether it's Jordan Mailata, Dillard, like you said, a ton of options. So let's try and predict some other creative ones that could happen, or uncreative.
Yeah, I mean, there is, when we talk about, it starts with Brooks and Johnson. I mean, they're big names, but they make a lot of money. They're aging, and they both have a pretty significant injury history. So I think it's more likely that the Eagles try to restructure both of them, to be honest. And that's part of that salary cap thing that we talk about that's a little overblown, because the Eagles are going to restructure Brandon Graham. They're going to restructure most likely Fletcher Cox, probably some of the offensive linemen, and that'll help them as well. But, if things go in a negative direction, I can't imagine the Eagles trading them because of their contracts. You're not going to get value back unless things go really poorly when it comes to the renegotiation front. And remember, I get to see numbers, but I don't get to see actual wording. A lot of modern contracts have clauses built in where you can just restructure. You don't need the player's approval. So in a lot of instances, the Eagles can do that on their own. And the money is just moved around. So we'll see how all that works out. But you have to at least put Brooks and Johnson, at least a little bit, just put an asterisk next to their names because of their age, because of their contracts, because of their injury history. That the Eagles might consider doing something. But, yeah, it's, as we said, how much do you like Jack Driscoll? How much do you like Jordan Mailata? Can he play right tackle? Think about that. Maybe you have Andre Dillard at left tackle, Jordan Mailata at right tackle. That's what we said, a lot of options for this team.
If you're Nick Sirianni, there's a lot of options. There's so much uncertainty everywhere on this team, but at offensive line too. I mean, what's Lane Johnson becoming? He's getting injured. What's Brandon Brooks becoming? He's not human, Brooks, as we all know, but there's a chance he takes a step back here after what he's been through. There's so much uncertainty, and then there's so much focus on the quarterback spot, but if you don't have the offensive line, you're not going to be able to see what you have at all under center.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, because generally when you get to the age of Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks and you are injury prone, it doesn't usually just solve itself. So I do think it's legitimate to be concerned about both of those players because the injury histories have been pretty significant. You can go back to what Lane said about his ankle last year when he finally Sort of tapped out and said, I just can't play anymore, and he described it as exploding on him. That's not a good explanation. So you do have to worry about it. You do have to worry about, can they stay healthy? Can they play 16 games? But on the other hand, you have to at least envision that if they do play 16 games, well, I'm sure you've seen, Ryan, certain people say that the Eagles should do what the Sixers did and blow this whole thing up. I got news for you. If you have Dillard, Sayamalu, Kelsey, Brooks, Johnson, this team could win a bad division next year. That's how good that group potentially could be if everybody's healthy, if everybody's playing 16 games. That could shift this team dramatically. That alone. No matter who the quarterback is, who the receivers are, all the weapons, that's how good that group could potentially be if they're healthy and playing together for 16 games.
And I think that could be the downfall of this organization too. Like, we're wrapping up after tonight's conversation. We went through the offensive side of the ball. And one thing that's transparent here, there's a rebuild possibility for each position. Wide receiver, quarterback, running back, tight end, Ertz leaving, and now offensive line. Like, and Howie Roseman and Lori, they have to decide, are we retooling or rebuilding? And that answer, I don't think, can be the same for every single position on the offensive side of the ball, can it?
No, and it never is. And that's why I think the comparisons to NBA level, rebuilds are not fair in the NFL, because you don't have to do it. And, every team has veteran players, and every team needs veteran players, and every position is always fluid. And certain teams are really good at certain positions and really bad at others. The Eagles are no different. On paper, as I said, the offensive line, if everyone's healthy, and that's a big if, I can't emphasize that enough. That is a huge if. If everyone's healthy, and everyone's back, I mean, it's a top 5 offensive line. And that's how quickly things shift. You go from bottom 10 to top 5 that quickly, just with getting Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, and Andre Dillard back. That's how quickly it could happen. Those are three talented players, 2 that are proven, 1 that has a tremendous talent. I mean, that's a big, big difference.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's so much unknown. Talking about the offensive line here with John McMullen. Follow John at JF McMullen on Twitter. PhillyVoice.com and SI.com is where you can find all of John's written work, and Extending the Play every Saturday at 10 a.m. on 1490. Is there any names that you're aware of here outside of the first round at offensive line? And there always is, but anyone that you can say, okay, if they can look here and really improve this offensive line still with youth?
Boy, I mean, because of what they have and because of the depth, one of the things one of the terms that Jim Schwartz always coined and used and I loved was startup costs. And he said there's a lot of startup costs with young players, but once you're forced into it, and you're generally usually forced into it by injury, as the Eagles were, all of a sudden it ramps up the development. You get there quickly. I can't emphasize enough how good Nate Herbig was late last season. I mean, that guy was a legitimate starting guard in the NFL. And, I don't know anybody who saw that coming. And I think everybody loves Jordan Mailata for different reasons. I don't think he's nearly as advanced as Nate Herbig is, and I think that will shock people. But, to me, Jordan's more of a feast or famine guy. He's so big, he's so strong, he's so athletic. When he does something well, it's like Quentin Nelson. It's like everybody calls Quentin Nelson offensive line porn, but he does it consistently. Whereas Jordan does it very, very inconsistently because he's still tremendously raw. But you got a lot of those startup costs out of the way, is what I'm trying to say. And to a lesser extent, same thing with the Jack Driscoll as well. So how many, and these are all extremely young players, how many prospects do you need as far as developmental goes? And that's why I don't think, even though the Eagles believe that that's where you build your football team, as I said, on both sides of the line, they have so many other holes. When you're talking later in the draft, when needs become real and you have to fill certain positions, I don't think they're going to be looking at our offensive line because they have so many young players. I haven't even gotten to Sua Opeta, who they like. And I mentioned a little bit about Jariga they like. I mean, they're deep on the offensive line. I know that shocks people because of the 14 different groups, but remember, those injured guys, they're coming back in theory.
We'll transition to the defensive side of the ball here starting tomorrow night. And, just to wrap up this conversation tonight, John, let's look at the NFL as a whole right now because there's so many storylines. Story out today on ESPN.com that the Jets GM, Joe Douglas, says he's open to Sam Darnold offers, and he downplays the idea of trading for a star player. Your thoughts there and the potential impact?
Well, I think you have to downplay it as much as possible. And sort of this is sort of the combine availability, which is always a little bit, I don't want to call it useless because it's always good, and we haven't in Philadelphia. We're not going to get Nick Sirianni or Harry Roseman before the new league year. But typically when you have the combine, remember, it's before the new league year. You can't talk about trades. So you go back to Frank Reich. He couldn't talk about Carson Wentz. He couldn't use that name. Now you try to get around it as much as possible, but certainly you can't go in Joe can't say I'm going to go all in for Deshaun Watson or I'm going to try to get Russell Wilson. So you sort of dance around these types of things, and obviously they want to generate as much interest in Sam Darnold as possible. They're going in a different direction at quarterback. The only question is that different direction going to be a Watson type or is it going to be Zach Wilson, a rookie? That, to me, is the only question with the Jets.
We'll talk about it plenty, I'm sure, as all these dominoes, we're waiting for the first one to fall, as the quarterback carousel. That's the offseason name for the NFL this year. John and I will talk about the Eagles and everything else surrounding the NFL latest every night at 7:30. Follow John at JF McMullen. Go check out his work at PhillyVoice.com and Sports Illustrated at SI.com. And listen to John every Saturday, 10 a.m., extending the play. All right, John, go watch the Sixers take on the Utah Jazz.
That's a big one.
It is. It is. It would be really nice for them to get this win here tonight before the break. We'll see.
Got to take good shots, as the Jazz often do. Analytics game.
Analytics, baby. That's what it's all about. All right, John, we'll do it again tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Yep. All right, there he is, Johnny Mack. And here's my 2 cents as we have like a minute and a half before I have to get to the top of the hour VSiN update. Good stuff from John. Good stuff from Mitch Lawrence. We're live on Twitch, twitch.tv/thefix1490. I don't want to hear, oh, well, this division's really bad. And, if these players are healthy and if this pans out and if that pans out and this and that, then maybe the Eagles can win a bad division. Great. What what the bleep does that mean? What is that getting them? An 8-8 NFC East title. What does that get them? Nothing. Like, I don't want any decisions made or not made this offseason because of the potential to win a crappy NFC East. Like, we've seen this team pass on the opportunity to rebuild and quote-unquote retool and take another stab at things, and they stab themselves and they swing and miss. If you think you have a guy at number 6 who's a left tackle who can be an all-pro at left tackle for the next 10 years, get him. Get him. Don't placate to the fans or the media. Don't try and get too cute. Build this team. You just cleaned house with the coaching staff. You just got rid of the quarterback in Carson Wentz. You have questions all over the field on both sides. Don't even let a thought creep into your mind about winning this stupid, crappy NFC East division. I don't care. I don't care.
The middle.
It's called the Gonza Fort Peninsula Park.
Looks nice.
It's a nice green space.
Right. Just looks like, what's the park in the middle of New York?
Central Park?
Central Park, yeah. Central Park, yeah.
Most famous park in the world.
Right. It's probably the most famous green space on the planet.
The Middle with Eitan Shander, Barrett Brooks, and Harry Mays. Weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern.